Without a doubt, one of the most common forms of fear that we humans can experience in our lives is fear of the unknown. It's what makes darkness terrifying, it's what makes abyssal oceans terrifying, and it's what can often allow the science fiction genre to merge with the horror genre. After all, science fiction's use of fantastical realism often draws from the mysteries of the universe, like what could be out there beyond our planet, or what will the distant future look like. When combined with horror, all kinds of the fantastical what-if questions that sci-fi tends to ask are answered in not-so-nice ways. What if aliens exist, and they're bloodthirsty killing machines? What if teleportation was possible, but it caused your body to mutate? And in the case of today's subjects, what if you could explore a fantastical alien world only to find out that everything there, possibly even the very world itself, is trying to kill you in horrifying ways? The strengths of combining horror with science fiction often come from taking the fantastical realism of sci-fi and showing a horrifying downside, and today's movies both look into the fantastical ideas of alien worlds and DNA alterations, and just how terrifying both ideas could be. But enough talking, let's look at today's comparisons. In the negative corner, we have Prometheus, a stealth prequel to the Alien franchise, which sees a group of scientists travel out to an alien planet that they believe to be inhabited by humanity's predecessors, beings they call engineers, only to encounter a mysterious gooey black substance that alters DNA. In the positive corner, we have Annihilation, a movie about a woman on a mission to explore an alien landscape that has sprung up on Earth known as the Shimmer, to figure out where it started from, why it's growing and engulfing its surroundings, and why it turned her formerly MIA husband into a near catatonic wreck. So, to begin to explain exactly why Annihilation succeeds where Prometheus fails, honestly, let's just compare their first scenes. Prometheus begins with an engineer on Earth drinking some black goo which forcibly dissolves his body, leading to his DNA reforming and, as it's implied, creating life on Earth. Annihilation begins with a flash forward to our main protagonist Lena being interrogated by a man in a hazmat suit, giving vague, confused answers to him, followed by a flashback to a strange meteorite hitting a lighthouse and altering the surroundings of the impact site. Now, you might be thinking, well, those are both perfectly acceptable scenes, what's wrong? See, Annihilation gives some answers to what's going on, and some spoilers to what's about to happen, but otherwise keeps everything a mystery for the audience to discover. We learn that Lena does survive the journey, but not what it did to her. We learn some characters die, but others' fates are left unknown. We learn the Shimmer is the result of an alien meteor hitting a lighthouse, but what it's doing to the Earth and what it did to Lena's husband are left unknown until later on. Prometheus, on the other hand, explains every single mystery that will be solved in this movie in this opening scene. We see what the engineers look like, we see that they are indeed responsible for creating life on Earth, and we see they do it by altering their DNA using black goo. The only mysteries that aren't solved here are not solved at all. I'm certainly not the first to criticise Prometheus for not explaining anything, but nonetheless, here is a list of the mysteries brought up but never solved. Annihilation is a story where, as the characters travel further and further into the Shimmer, more and more mysteries are revealed and many are horrifying. Prometheus, on the other hand, reveals very little, and the majority of the mysteries have practically zero payoff. Strange things happen that aren't explained, but because they simply come and go without a real answer, and sometimes they're completely irrelevant to the plot anyway, it's just hard to care, especially when the characters act like such idiots. Yeah, Prometheus falls into the usual cliche of horror movie characters being thrown the idiot ball and constantly going against their better judgment, which, with some exceptions, makes them mostly unlikable and uninteresting. Annihilation's characters, on the other hand, replace idiocy with natural self-destructive tendencies, which, as the plot explains, makes sense as it's the only reason anyone would want to enter the Shimmer. As a result, the characters are a lot more interesting and sympathetic. Even Anya, the character who effectively becomes an antagonist, is still a tragic antagonist, shown to be losing her mind as the Shimmer is affecting her body to a terrible degree. It's a lot easier to become invested in characters' journeys into mysterious, creepy alien worlds when we feel like we can sympathise with, or at the very least, rely on them. But when they repeatedly act like inconsistent idiots, it's hard to care about them, and so it's hard to care about what horrors affect them. Once again, a key way to kill investment in any horror movie is to make the characters so hard to root for that you flat out don't care if they get themselves killed. So, what about the alien worlds themselves? Prometheus's world is kind of boring. The land is mostly barren and devoid of life aside from this weird snake thing. The ruined structures they explore are strange and labyrinthian, but I wouldn't exactly call them memorable, and a lot of the features that are interesting are mostly irrelevant aside from the black goo. All of these things merely lead up to the big reveal that this planet is a military base dedicated to weapon research. Okay, I guess that was a mystery not solved by the opening scene. Annihilation's world, on the other hand, is very interesting. As the characters travel further, they start to encounter various specimens that seem to be eerie fusions of different Earth life forms, like a crocodile with a shark's mouth, a giant plant with multiple varied flowers, a strange twisted fungal human corpse, a deer with blossom-covered horns that seems to have a doppelganger. All of these things are leading up to the answer that this location is taking the old life of Earth and creating new life by combining DNA, refracting it all like a prism, and that humans are certainly not immune to this. Which brings me to my next point. One of the most common features of sci-fi horror is the classic trope of body horror. Older sci-fi body horror movies were usually made using practical effects, and this well and truly assisted in making the body horror look as gruesome and visceral as possible, something that's difficult to achieve with modern CGI movies, as their effects simply look too flashy and clean. Annihilation, however, has an interesting take on that. Annihilation's body horror, rather than being bloody and visceral, is, in a way, eerily beautiful. Rather than showing bloody, mangled bodies, twisted and mutated, Annihilation shows a twisted fusion of animals and humans with nature. Nature can, after all, be beautiful and terrifying, and sometimes the brightest, prettiest flora and fauna can be the most deadly. Prometheus's body horror, on the other hand, well, I will admit, there is one very effective moment where a character who has consumed black goo finds a worm sprouting from his eyeball. That is genuinely unsettling and terrifying. The scene where the main character is forced to have a freaky alien squid baby removed from her uterus is also actually quite effective, and does tap into the Alien franchise's usual themes of horrifying pregnancy. But then there's the scene with the zombie. Yeah, there's a zombie in this movie. Why? I don't know. The black goo did it, I guess? He shows up, fights the cast, gets killed. I guess it's supposed to show us how deadly and horrifying the black goo is, but zombies are a dime a dozen in horror movies. Show me the freaky worm transformation you promised. For a perfect comparison of why Annihilation is better than Prometheus, let's compare the zombie scene with possibly the most well-known scene from Annihilation, that being the scene with the bear. Unlike the zombie, the bear scene has a real build-up. Earlier in the movie, the group is attacked by a bear who is mostly unseen, and it ends up killing the character known as Cass. Later, Anya, on the brink of insanity, ties up her colleagues in an abandoned house, believing they're after her and that there was no bear. She then hears Cass's voice, runs downstairs, and is attacked off-screen. Enter the bear, which not only has an exposed skull for a face, but is able to perfectly mimic Cass's screams of agony. Unlike the zombie scene in Prometheus, which is just a generic action scene in broad daylight with a boring zombie design, the bear scene takes place in quiet, tense darkness, with the characters frozen to their seats, desperately trying to avoid being noticed by the presumably blind bear, being forced to listen to the sounds of their dead friend's voice echo from its mouth. It allows the audience to take in what they're seeing and wonder if the bear is merely mimicking Cass in order to lure in victims like Anya, or more horrifyingly, if the effects of the shimmer have fused them together and the remains of Cass's consciousness are desperately crying out for help. Both options are terrifying. Neither are confirmed, which lets our imaginations do the work for us. While the zombie isn't explained either, the only real answer to its existence is the black goo did it. That's not especially scary, nor does it raise any interesting or terrifying possibilities. A mystery with no real payoff is only scary when the implied payoff is terrifying on its own. When there is no implied payoff, what are the audience supposed to take from that aside from, oh look, a zombie? Annihilation does leave a lot of questions unanswered, like how much of the shimmer remains in Lena, or the shimmer's motivations and whether or not it is truly malevolent. But these are questions that didn't necessarily need answering, where leaving them unanswered can make the whole situation more unsettling, and the audience can potentially fill in the blanks themselves. Prometheus, on the other hand, explains so little. Some questions that arguably needed to be answered, like why did the engineers leave messages inviting humans to their weapons research facility, are not only not answered, but it's hard to even come up with any logical answers for them. So, to summarise, Annihilation is an interesting story that shows a tragic group of characters venturing deep into a beautiful but twisted and terrifying alien world, which gradually becomes more and more eerie and distorted, culminating in the lone survivor escaping, but maybe not quite, while Prometheus is a cluttered story of a group of idiots exploring a random alien weapons research base and mostly screwing themselves over, where nothing is explained and no mystery has any kind of decent payoff. Which is a shame, given it's supposed to be a prequel to one of the greatest sci-fi horror movies ever made. As I've said, sci-fi horror should be all about taking the wonders of science fiction and showing their dark side. In the case of these two movies, Annihilation truly takes us on a horrifying journey through an alien landscape, but Prometheus takes us through a string of random scenes, some of which aren't terrible, but others are completely irrelevant. And it's the story of some weird black goo that did some weird stuff to people. That's about the most you're gonna get. While it is always human nature to fear the unknown, at the same time, they do say that what you don't know can't hurt you. And when it comes to the mysteries of Prometheus, I can honestly say, I have no idea. Thanks for watching the video. If you want to hear my real thoughts on both these movies, consider dropping me some cash on Patreon, as I hope to release a vid there discussing what I think of both soon. I know a lot of people do still like Prometheus, and while it's not the worst movie I've ever seen, I can honestly say I don't like it. As always, like, share and subscribe and all that jazz, and I hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye!